feeling of dysphoria is something that I've suffered with all of my life. I mean, if you look at the button test, and if I could press a magic button and be a girl, I still would. It was never a constant. It pops up during times of like stress and depression. And then also people being as sad as I was. I don't want people to be sad. Transmaxxing is transitioning within the realms of reality in a sense. In a funny sort of way, it's people transitioning but taking into account that other people exist. The guy who ran it, he just throws up a million red flags. He sounds like he has a bunch of marbles in his mouth.
The role made so not really suitable for having children in the first place. I do believe that eugenics is a good thing if it is implemented well.
But then from the transmaxers I've seen, very hard for me to see even much of a difference. I feel like they're being sold a huge lie.
List of like strategy games, trans.
People will sort of sneer at those kind of men, but then a trans woman, oh, you're so sweet.
And because it's like, oh, I want to be a woman, so I'll have a man look after me and pay for everything. You can't just say, hey, now we're inserting people into your safe space. You might have PTSD, you might have sexual assault, you might have all these things, but we don't care. We're just inserting them. Some of the ideas are probably shared by a much wider cross-section of trans people than they would like to admit.
Would you say there's such a thing as true trans? Sascha Bailey, welcome to my podcast. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me, Jack.
No problem. So, on your Instagram handle, I have you as an art curator, Web3 inventor, model, founder and journalist for FOMA. And then you have the tagline, raising the alarm on failures of thought. You're also the son of photographer David Bailey. And I first saw you on Stella and Sasha Ayad's podcast, Gender A Wider Lens, which I absolutely loved. I actually listened to that. I think it was on the morning of my 30th birthday because I just had this massive night out and I was feeling so sorry for myself, kind of lying down and just had some headphones in, but I absolutely loved it. And then we've been communicating on Twitter for a while. You've been sending me lots of interesting things about the world of transmaxxing. So yeah, I guess we can start with you, and I'd love to know a bit about you, your life, and then kind of what led you here.
Yeah, so I think the best place to start is kind of like, when I moved out to Japan and when I was there for a few years. I think the position I was in and what was going on in my personal life, it brought up a lot of feelings that I would have before, and it kind of pushed me towards this idea. And I often think as well, like you said in the cell of the podcast and the wider lens, I watch myself back and I tend to instantly deflect and start talking about something else. So I'm going to try my best to actually talk about my story, which is
Sure.
So I guess where it started was the feeling of dysphoria is something, as I've said before, is something that I've suffered with all of my life. It's something that comes in bouts. But when I was in Japan, the isolation and being completely alone, and then being pulled not necessarily into communities that were ultra trans focused, but communities that it was kind of on the cusp of, and having it all around me and that sort of thing, it made me feel as if even though the content I was watching at the time, a lot of people would consider to be kind of anti that, it still made me feel like I kind of wanted to do it. I wanted to move towards it because it looked like a solution to the problems, as it has before in my life, but it looks even more so to kind of insurmountable stuff that was going on. And I wanted to move away from who I was, and the opportunity to be someone else, not only because of the feelings that I had had that kind of drew me to it, but also, being honest about it, is someone who is thinking of transitioning, I think, should be aware of the benefits or the drawbacks they'll get. So I was thinking about, I was in this position where I was a CEO, I was in tech. One transitioning in that position, not only are you doing it because, say, you want to fulfill something, but also you get the opportunity to be the first at something. You get the opportunity to be the first, trans person who's done something. And I do think that if people are being honest with themselves, transitioning for any reason, that should play a part in it in some way. You should actually be thinking, because if you're not thinking about the benefits you'll get, you're also not really thinking about the way you affect other people. And that's quite insulated. Like, that's not, I guess it's quite a selfish way of thinking, because in a way, if you're not aware of it, if you're aware of it and you do it anyway, then that's that's potentially you're moving, you're invading female spaces. But if you're aware of it,
Yeah.
and but in either way, I think you should be aware of it. And I was aware, like being completely honest, I was aware that it would have given me some sort of bonus. It would have done something good for me. And I think that's also something what I really want to, and I did touch on Stella's podcast, which I think is really important, is I really do think there are as many reasons to transition as there are people. Everyone keeps going to these two from that study in the late 80s or whatever. Yeah, where it's instantly either dysphoria or autogynephilia, and I do feel in a way that binary isn't very helpful, because especially now, when that study was done, there weren't the incentives that existed that they exist now. People weren't thinking about Caitlyn Jenner didn't exist. These people who have got like Women of the Year, they didn't exist. So those people who have now come out and done that, and they've got a lot of stuff for it, that's given people a new way to look at it. And I think that we need to factor that into all of this. Is it's not just this binary of two things that they talk about for men. I think it's almost free in the way, and if not maybe more, but it's the autogynephilia would be one for sure. Although I do find that term somewhat hard to define, and sometimes I do feel like people overuse it. But also the second one would obviously be dysphoria, and I think now the third one that has to be acknowledged, and it is definitely present for men, but I actually almost think it's more of a thing for females transitioning, is the aspects of wanting some sort of benefit, or not even wanting some sort of benefit, wanting something that society grants to the other gender. So I've spoken to a few people who are thinking of transitioning who are girls, and a lot of them bring up this idea of being able to be topless on a beach. That seems to be like a thing that gets repeated, and it sounds very simplistic, but it's like, okay, I want to be topless on a beach because I don't want the male gaze, essentially. I want to remove this thing, so I don't look at it in that way. So I do think, I think that sort of factor, that's like a small example, but that's like an incentive factor. That's, I want to do something. It's not just I feel like this, or or it's some sort of anything. It's I want to be able to do something because of this.
Yeah, I think I've been thinking about this more because I've quite heavily subscribed to Blanchard's typology, and I've interviewed, two guys with autogynephilia, one a detransitioner, one not a transitioner. They're also quite adamant on that dichotomy. However, like something you said with autogynephilia and dysphoria, I mean, I think it's poorly understood that lots of autogynephiles are actually severely dysphoric. It's sort of demonized. Well, it's very problematic, and I know that it's very problematic, right? It can cause lots of issues, but it's oversimplified into just a fetish, whereas it's a lot more complicated. And I think for the ones that transition, they truly do have this female identity formed, and especially, I think I've heard they can be even more dysphoric because some of them, it's purely about their body rather than, they hate their male anatomy and everything. And then obviously, like you mentioned, the other type with men who are attracted to men. And are you heterosexual, or if you mind me asking?
No, I'm bisexual.
Okay. So
well, hey, I just came out to everybody.
Happy coming out day. We're actually the exact same. Well, not the exact same, but born in the same year. I saw when I googled you. Yeah, I just turned 30, so it looks like you're hot on my tails.
I'm trying to forget about that. I try to imagine I'm still 29 when I think about it.
Yeah, well, you look great.
But yeah, no, thank you. As do you.
But I think what you said is really telling, because in a similar way that we've seen this drastic change with girls that were never seen before, it's only logical to assume that we might be seeing other subtypes within boys, and there are going to be crossovers. They're going to be, just like you mentioned, which we'll dig into, this transitioning for the benefits, but then perhaps, from my understanding, some of these men may have slight autogynephilic tendencies, but it wouldn't have become obsessive if it wasn't this culture that we're living in, right? But so when it comes to you, when do you kind of first remember that desire to become female?
I haven't said this before, but the first time that I thought about transitioning really was when I must have been like 6, 7, 8, something like that, and I was in the bathtub, and I remember thinking about trying to cut off my member with a pair of nail clippers. And as I said in the Stella podcast, I think that was I was, I was assaulted as a child, so I think that was probably related to that. But that's the first time I remember of this kind of deep seed of not necessarily wanting to be female, but just not wanting that anatomy. Throughout that, and I don't really remember thinking about it much until maybe until teenager years after then, and then around 14, 15, 16, I was kind of watching a lot of I guess very, very early, like pro-trans content, and on a few of the kind of forums and things like that. And I wasn't really talking, I was just kind of lurking, but I saw a lot of what people were talking about. And I remember really kind of feeling this strong feeling, oh, I should think about doing this now. Yeah. But it only really came for a short time, and then it went away. Well, and then it came back, but it was like, it wasn't something that, it was never a constant. It pops up during times of like stress and depression.
Yeah. It's very interesting that it sort of comes as some sort of a coping mechanism or a trigger, if I'm understanding correctly, when you're going through something stressful.
Yeah, I think that's when it happens the most, when things are going, when things are kind of difficult. And I think because of what happened to me, I've never really been able to identify with like male role models.
Yeah.
So I generally identify with female ones, and I think that's probably part of the feeling as I went and as I got older, because those female actresses, those female kind of protagonists or whatever, were much more appealing to me than the male ones, because the male ones represented someone who had hurt me.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, and it reminds me of, there's a BBC documentary that came out in the 80s. This guy, male to female, but it was fascinating to watch because it was made so long ago. But I think she now, but she described a story of being a young adolescent and going through something similar with men on lots of occasions. And to me, I'm obviously no psychologist, but I thought it seemed quite clear the connection that this person wanted to escape homosexuality because they were exclusively attracted to men. And I think their experience of what it meant to be homosexual was, terrible and traumatic. And I remember watching this person in an appointment with a psychiatrist, and they were saying, I can't have, anal sex. I can't do that. And, it's all the links were sort of there. And the psychiatrist did say, I am concerned about this past of yours, but I mean, ultimately ended up going for it. So yeah, I think you can definitely, there's so many links to trauma in different ways, right?
Well, I've only really become comfortable, I participated in homosexual activities, for lack of a better, sounds very silly saying it like that, but for lack of a better way of phrasing it, before. But I was very uncomfortable with coming to terms with the fact that I was bisexual until maybe the last year and a half. So okay. I maybe that also played a part in it. I don't know. I couldn't say for sure, but I've only really become comfortable with that since I stopped being trans, and I went through that kind of phase. And I don't know, maybe that was part of the psychology of it, is I finally kind of realized that, oh, okay, no, that's fine. And it's not really a big deal, but maybe I wouldn't say for sure, because I don't actually, it's quite hard to know what you think, if that makes sense. And people don't often know why they think the things they do. But I would find it difficult to point exactly, but I do think I've become more comfortable with it since.
Yeah. Well, it sounds to me, knowing your story, that you've been on such an intense journey, and some of this is still so recent, right? So, there's so much time to just keep learning. When you felt these bouts of dysphoria, you said that you were sort of escaping that role as a man, or wanting to escape. Did you also feel a female identity within you as well? Like, was that something that you clung to, or was it, like you said, a lot more to do with escaping masculinity?
No, there was there was definitely female identity. It almost came through as it almost comes down like an overlay of your personality in a sense. Like you adopt a lot of things that you like you from people, and it kind of all of these things merged into one. And yeah, 100%, there was a female identity emerging. The person who I was when I was trans is not the same kind of thought process, I guess, of the person that I am now or the person that I was before. It was definitely kind of it was an identity which didn't have the same kind of restrictions, but also the same anything. It wasn't the same
Yeah.
person. It was kind of it was an escapism in many ways. Yeah, it also did feel like another identity. It felt like another person, but
Mm.
the same person, but just different.
Yeah. I can understand how tempting it can be to recreate yourself. And this doesn't just happen in trans, it happens in many different ways. You know, someone moves to a new country where they don't know anyone and they kind of completely change themselves. And I think for people going through it, wanting to escape their body, you mentioned something very interesting to me on the podcast with Stella. And don't worry, for anyone listening, we're going to branch up to some new areas as well. But you said, if I recall correctly, that if you can't control your environment, you change yourself. Could you
Yeah.
explain a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think that's true of just humans in general. If you find yourself in a position where you cannot change something, it's impossible. You'll change yourself to fit the problem, and I guess you could look at that as simple as if you're not strong enough to lift a boulder, you'll make yourself stronger. But in society as it is now, the incentives that have been laid out, especially for young men, are very difficult for them to solve the problems with. They don't have the tools that are necessary, and they're not given the role models that they need to do so. So a lot of them are probably, yeah, and I actually think it's really sad because I think that a lot of the hyper intelligent ones are doing this because it is a problem solving aspect, and in a way we're losing a lot of very hyper intelligent people to this.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and I think that's we look at this, and especially people who kind of have like a very logical thought process, maybe people who have kind of neurodivergent, they would look at this and they see it as a way to solve their problems. Oh, I can't get a girlfriend. I can't get this. I can't get a girlfriend. I can't get into the programs that I want to get into. I can't get into certain spaces because they're female only. And I do think that there's a lot of people who are doing it simply for like I said, the functional purpose of changing themselves to fit their environment. Like the example I always bring up is the Transmaxxer who switched because she wants to get into STEM fields. That is an example of someone who wasn't invading female spaces for a nasty reason. They were invading female spaces because they just wanted to get an education, which they shouldn't have had to do that.
Yeah, of course. Now that you mentioned that, we should probably dive into transmaxing. So, to be honest, even though I've been so entrenched in this conversation for a while, I don't think I actually knew what this word meant until just a few weeks ago. So,
Mm.
what is transmaxing?
So transmaxing is transitioning for functional reasons, or no, I would say it's transitioning within the realms of reality in a sense. It's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily it's first of all, it's only for men. Women are not allowed to transmax, and it says this in the manifesto because I think it says something along the lines because they don't end up more beautiful, so it would be worse. So it's not transmaxing. It has to be men who transmax because you have to be better off at the end. I guess that's the concept. It doesn't you can agree or disagree with everything they say in the manifesto, but their base idea is that you should be better off for transitioning. So they have all sorts of crazy guidelines, like you should only transition if you're under 5'11". If you're feminine looking, you should never do bottom surgery, which to be fair, I actually agree with that one. Because the technology just simply isn't there yet, they posit. And then it's essentially transitioning, but within the realms of all of kind of the functional things in mind. I mean, they say in their FAQ section, one of the things like how they define a trans woman is they say, well, a woman is an adult female, but if you take hormones and HRT, you absorb chemicals, you absorb hormones, your biological system changes. So they argue that then you are a trans woman. and then men are men, trans women are trans women, and women are adult human females. That's kind of how they put it forward.
Okay, so they're not on the
So
trans
yeah,
women are women train.
no, they're almost a lot of them, because it's also difficult to group because they're kind of, they a lot of them skew more towards the incel and the 4chan sort of side of things, and a lot of them are kind of right wing. So actually, they're kind of they're not as much of a monolith. They're just a loose group of people who all have these ideas. The guy who wrote the manifesto is a bloody weirdo. But the guy who is in the group, he's weird. Like, that whole thing is odd. But the actual people in the group I spoke to, some of them are just trans people who don't want to hang out with trans people who are constantly going on about all the ideological stuff. Some of them are incels that decided to be trans because they wanted it to be easier. But then there's other ones in the group who just say they're coping and they were always trans and they're just using this as an excuse. So it's hard to define exactly because it's very loose. In a funny sort of way, it's people transitioning but taking into account that other people exist. So one of the thing is that, which is a funny way of saying it, but I do think that
So it's about time,
yeah, it's like that is a problem with the mainstream one. Is it does feel like, we want everyone should have equal rights. Everyone should be happy. No one should hate anyone or attack anyone for something they want to look like or something they are. But at the same time, you do have to be, aware that other people exist. And, it's one thing for us to treat you with respect. It's another thing to demand to come into someone else's space and then be treated with respect. And I think what it says in Transmaxx's whole thing is basically, they want to, like they say things, they do say stuff like don't transition immediately, wait until you look better. Like it's all based on physicalities. That's why it falls into the the incel group of maxing, like looks maxing, all of that sort of stuff. It is part of that umbrella. So it is all about shallow and physicalities, but it also does have. And I did say this on Twitter. It's kind of disturbing that the transmaxers seem like they have a less harmful ideology than the mainstream one. And that's quite disturbing to look at, is they at least look at things in some sort of logical way with data, and they want to do it anyway. And it's kind of, I think it actually speaks way more to society than it does to them, that their whole outlook, if you go through the manifesto, it might be mental and weird, but within the paradigm that we exist, it's not illogical. And that's kind of, I don't think that's a reflection on them. I think that's a reflection of how men are treated these days.
Yeah, I think, well, on one hand, it's sort of refreshing just to hear someone say, listen, this is why I transitioned. I get these 10 benefits. I'm trying to pass, instead of all this like, oh, I have an essence of femaleness within me and there's no such thing as a woman. You can't describe what like, it's just like, stop. You know what I mean? So on one hand, I find that refreshing because trying to be in a conversation with a gender ideologue is just, you're never going anywhere. And then on the other hand, it is sort of dystopian, transhumanistic, very strange. And you mentioned the manifesto and the creator. So could you tell me a bit more about that? Do you know when this concept came around and like how this was initiated by someone?
Yeah, so I actually think I'm quite early on finding out about it, because I saw it at some other podcasts, and I think I watched a few YouTube videos that were kind of loosely related, and then I found out about the Discord and I jumped in, because at the time I still wasn't sure if I wanted to transition or not. This was after I came back to England. And I put it all into a magazine in the end, which is out, but I wanted to talk to as many people as I could. And then I heard about this thing kind of just through the grapevine. And I went, okay, well, those people seem like they have a completely different point of view on this. I'll go speak to them. It was, God, it would have been like 2 years ago. So their manifesto would have already been out. It was on like a Reddit then. Now they have their own website. But the guy who ran it, I went and interviewed him, and he just throws up a million red flags, because he's not trans, has never been trans, for some reason is running this group. In the interview with me, he said all this stuff about incels, and then on Twitter recently kind of came up and tried to backtrack on a lot of the stuff he said, but he did clearly say in our interview that he was an authoritarian, interested in rapid expansion, and likes eugenics. So he did say those things, and that's a very odd guy to be running a group online of people who want to transition. Like all the stuff that I've just said about their manifesto, it may be true, but crazy people can create logical things too.
Of course.
And I think that he is what I would say is the risky part of something like that, and that also speaks to all these other online groups. How if there's one person running a group like that who's willing to put all this stuff together, then how many other people are there out there who are also willing to do that, and how many people are on those subreddits who have these thoughts? Because it's just, I think as well, the Transmaxxers really did reveal to me the honesty, and some of them who don't consider themselves Transmaxxers, like the one Kat, who the interview that I did with was going around, she just considers herself trans, but likes the Transmaxxers because they're kind of not, they're not ideologues. So
Right.
some people in the group are just, they're just normal. But the other people in the group, I think, as well, the leaders of the group are always the people who are a bit strange in general. And
they sound quite predatory to me. I've heard a theory that some of the, I think it's spoken about more from a Reddit perspective. And to be honest, I think this is more the sort of autogynephilic community, but that there are some men who actually get off on, getting other men to transition. Do you sense that there's anything like that underlying?
Probably. I mean, after interviewing the guy, I really I just can't understand why he's doing it. Like, his motives don't make any sense. Like, why are you running this group? He says now it's to reduce harm, but it's weird. And I don't want to, I don't want to speak to exactly what someone else thinks, but I do think that it's a very odd thing for a person who's identifying as completely straight to be running, and not trans, to be running a group for people who want to transition. It's odd, and to make the whole thing, there's definitely, like you said, there's something going on there. I mean, and
And
slightly off
doing it
topic,
for
but
free,
still,
right?
yeah. Well, that's the other part. Like, why are you doing this? What's the thing? But I mean, I guess that also what you're saying about the fetish of watching people kind of, I guess, do that or destroy themselves. You have all those, those deep dives on YouTube of, it's slightly unrelated but still related. Those deep dives on YouTube where guys are the smoking fetish, where those guys kind of smoke themselves to death, and loads of people watch them, and that's a whole fetish on YouTube. It's a whole thing. So if there are people
Really?
out there who, yeah, I can't believe you haven't
Wow.
heard of this. Sorry to go off tangent, but yeah,
No,
it's a
no.
whole thing where guys basically, I think it's mostly a male. Obviously, it's a male fetish because most of them are. But there's someone who basically it's been a bunch of people, and they start off young and very good looking, effeminate, pretty boys, and they smoke cigarettes, and then they get paid on YouTube to smoke cigarettes, and all the comments are very weird, and then they kind of enjoy the whole process of dying, getting cancer, all of that, and it's all on YouTube for people to see. And it's like 4 or 5 cigarettes. These are like, I'll send you a link to a video about this. But it's very disturbing. And if there are people, now we have the internet, now everyone's connected, we have the ability for everyone to find their weird niche all over, and there are some people who are into some very strange stuff.
Yeah, and it is connected to the trans women that transition for that reason, and all of the sissy hypno porn. I think from what I understand, these paraphilias, there's an element of biology to them, or at least as a young child, it's fixed. I mean, a lot of them are from trauma, I think, but I think the issue is, like, in the past, someone may have a little bit of that kink in with them, that they sort of, it comes up and they think, oh God, no, what the hell is that? But now people are feeding it and growing the desire. So yeah, I think Blair White, who I love, has an awesome quote, and she says, if you don't understand something, it's probably a sex thing. So that guy creating this whole manifesto, running this Discord group of all these vulnerable incel guys, and I just wonder, but when you said eugenics, because I listened to this, right? And I felt like I was listening to something from like World War II, because it sounded like he's German, right?
He sounds like he has a bunch of marbles in his mouth as well. It's the most, like, I posted he posted the whole interview, you can watch it, but it is pretty hard to listen to.
Original motivation for the Transmaxxing thing, if you're going to like improve the future society, if they're all like males are not really suitable for having children in the first place, And we need to do something about this especially just the skada. We need to at least all of them to live good lives even if they get rejected. And this is why originally I got the Transmaxxing idea that they can transition and still live good lives. I do believe that Eugenics is a good thing if it is implemented well.
He was hard. Like,
Yeah.
I'm surprised you were able to fully understand him. Were you having to really concentrate when you?
Yeah, it took a lot of focus, and I had to make him repeat himself. And sometimes as well, when you were talking, it was just like, oh, okay. And then I had to play it back and work out. I think there are a few, even in the clips I sent, there are a few times where it was just unintelligible. Like, I have no idea what you just said, but it was, yeah, it's
Cool.
bizarre. You're right. He sold the part of a doctor, a German doctor, very well. It was
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was weird. The whole thing was weird. Now, he says now that it's about harm reduction, but again, there is no reason for this person to be doing this, like he said, so it's probably something weird.
And what does he mean by harm reduction?
So he sees it as, again, kind of like I said. I mean, there is a nugget of truth to this, that the Transmaxxing Manifesto practices some harm reduction things. Like, it suggests that people don't get bottom surgery because the technology isn't there and it's too risky. It's just like a few things that are genuinely maybe harm reduction, but in general, it's still, why have you made it? Why are you doing it? It's odd. So I think now he's pivoted after interviewing me, maybe, and I think getting some backlash to, oh, no. The whole time it's, harm reduction. But in reality, the manifesto does literally say more incels should transition so we can have fun fucking them. So you can't, those two things don't really jive.
And does he want these type of men to be sort of phased out of society genetically?
He didn't say that exactly, but he said that he thinks incels are very dangerous people and they can be very dangerous to society. I think his angle is more like they're unhappy, so they're dangerous, so we should make them trans so they'll be happy. But I do think the incel angle has fallen to the side, but that's definitely where it started. And the one the when I interviewed Tina was 100% an incel, and she hadn't, been with anyone until 19, and at that point was trying to destroy her sex drive through all sorts of crazy drugs, and then decided transitioning was the way to destroy the sex drive. So actually that speaks to almost the opposite of autogynephilia. Is that's an aspect that I have also heard other detransitioners talk about, is the want to get rid of your sex drive completely. So that would be, I mean, I guess not autogynephiliac or dysphoric. It would be something else, because that's, I mean, I don't know, you've spoken to more people than me on this issue, I guess, but I don't actually know.
I think there are a lot of autogynephiles that are very relieved when their sex drive lowers, because it can cause quite risky behavior. But I'm not sure. But it does make sense. Do you feel most of these men are attracted to women?
I wouldn't want to answer that for sure, because I have no idea. I think actually a lot of the ones at least you go by the manifesto, a lot of them seem to be attracted to other trans women. That seems to be their main goal. So I mean, to make it very silly,
because
simplistic,
that's a fetish.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you could say, to make it quite simplistic, that these incels can't get with anyone, so they were all like, okay, if we all transition, we can just be with each other. If you wanted to really put it down to a low level, you could say something like that. But
that's something I find it really hard to wrap my head around, because I do understand the loneliness and isolation if you're a man and you can't, you feel like you don't have a hope of ever finding a woman. But then if the idea of the manifesto is you can transition and now you can be with men, I find it very hard to relate to that they could kind of make themselves do that, because if it doesn't turn them on, then it's...
Well, they give all these case studies that aren't actually, they're not transmaxers, they're just trans people who've posted on Reddit, but they use some examples, and some of them are like people who transition, they weren't really into men, and then slowly they say, as the estrogen, came into them, quote unquote, they slowly started to like the idea of being with men more, and then some of the stories get quite graphic, and these aren't actually transmaxers, these are just Reddit people were posting on like female to male, because most of the pictures that people see alongside the Transmaxxing manifesto are not transmaxers; they're just trans people that they've taken the pictures for. But there is quite a lot of that in there, and I don't know if something like that. I don't know if that's like, like let's say a cope. I don't know if that's them saying, "Oh, now I have this thing. It's okay for me to like the thing I probably always liked."
Yeah, I think you'll get a range of different people, but it's sad because I feel like a lot of very vulnerable people, and I guess I don't know if it'd be a controversial take, but for the few transmaxers I've seen that you've sort of made me aware of, it's not very convincing. The female, they're on hormones and stuff. And have you seen in the UK they brought out a documentary from Channel 4 with a guy who's transitioned?
Yes, I hate that. It's really bad. Like that. Actually, all of the transmaxers I spoke to were kind of the more core members, and they were not fans of that either. And I also think it's quite convenient that Channel 4 didn't interview, the group leader. They didn't interview a bunch of other people because they probably didn't want to make this whole thing seem as crazy as it actually was, and I feel like it minimized it a lot, the Channel 4 documentary. It made it less about all of the kind of in-depth stuff they do talk about, which is like all the society stuff, and more just about the simple it was pure the benefits, and that is a huge factor in it, but there is a lot of incel logic in there too. So there's a lot of the the looks maxing stuff. There is a lot of the because incels have this habit. I follow this account, just the incels account on Twitter, and it's hilarious. It's like a stand-up comedian if you're really in the wrong context. But some of the stuff they say is, they constantly quote percentages. They constantly quote all of these things, and it's like, okay, well, all of this stuff is undeniably true, but what you guys are doing about it is the problem. That's like it's like you guys are actually probably right. When they talk about women rate 80% of men below average. That is just something that's been shown in studies, but their reaction to that is to be really down on it and get angry at women. It's rather than thinking of a solution to the problem, they're just wallowing in their own sadness, and that's where these kind of maxing things come from, because it's the looks maxing is another one. It's like, okay, well, I can't do that, so I'm going to get all this plastic surgery and then I'll just become a good looking person. That's how I'll solve the problem, rather than focusing on maybe being funnier or maybe having a better personality or something like that. They get too caught up in these realities that are realities and they are true, but they get too caught up in the idea of them to actually save themselves from them.
Yeah, and I do really see the neurodivergency, like you said, the autism perhaps, because I feel like they're being sold a lie as they are told. It's like you said, it's all functional instruction. So it's like I think I saw the list of steps, and the first one was like, start training your voice, then start growing your hair, get estrogen. And I feel like they follow that and they go, okay, if I change the things about my appearance, then the world will start treating me differently. But then from the transmaxers I've seen, like I said, it's very hard for me to see even much of a difference between their. So I feel like they're being sold a huge lie. It's overinflated. And I think for people that are already neurodivergent, they're hardly going to change things about their appearance and then just be this social butterfly that's like attracting all of these incredible things into their life. Not to say that they can't become that, but it is very black and white thinking for someone to think, okay, I'll follow these things and then my life will change. And if it does work for some people, it might just be because they've completed the steps, they feel more confident, and then they're actually putting themselves out there,
Well, they feel like they made an achievement. I mean, that is it. If you present someone who's very functional with a list of things you must do, they'll go through and do all of that list, and afterwards they'll probably feel good about completing that list. But you're right; it's not going to actually make a difference. A lot of them will get to the end of it and realize, oh, I've completed the list. Now there's nothing left to go. It's a lot of people like climbing the mountain. Getting to the top of the mountain is kind of boring. Once you're there, it's like, where do I go next? That's why I think a lot of people.
Yeah, you're like, oh, what did I just do?
Yes, like, oh dear, now I'm up. It's very high up here, and there's a long climb down. But yes, but no, that's why I do think that, there are some people who definitely have a form of body dysmorphia and not transgenderism, which will they'll just keep going. They'll find the next
Yeah.
thing to be extreme about. They'll find the next thing to move on to. Yeah.
And it's funny because the world treats these incel men, you know, people will sort of sneer at those kind of men who are kind of isolated, nerdy, neurodivergent, bad social skills. But then a trans woman who is kind of meek and small and socially awkward, people will be like, "Oh, you're so
Exactly.
sweet. You're so sweet," you know?
And that's kind of, I mean, I guess the basis of it is that's where fundamentally, if taking it to, you know, the highest level possible, that's where they are 100% right. Is as an incel, they'll be treated with scorn, but if they transition, people will hold the door open for them. People will have to be nice to them. People will have to address their correct pronouns. People will have to treat them with some level of respect. And again, it speaks more to society than it really does to them that is just true.
Yeah.
That's the sad part of it. Yeah.
But I think we're really on a turning point now, or heading towards a peak. And I think, unfortunately, I feel like in the future, once this conversation is drastically different and, you know, women's spaces are really more protected and some of the stuff they're allowing is just not on anymore, you will have a whole group of people who've been sold a lie that now go, oh gosh, you know?
Yeah.
Like, what if, for example, autogynephilia becomes widely known and everyone knows about it? People are going to start assuming like every trans woman is fetishistic, and then gosh, that will completely change. And I see it very similar, and not I'm not saying these two things are exactly the same, or trans women are predators or whatever, but I'm from Ireland, and back, you know, decades ago, priests were just like gods. You know, they could do anything. A priest walks into a restaurant, he got free food, free drinks. A priest goes on a plane, he gets bumped up to business class. And, you know, every family in the local community would want to be ingratiated by the priest. They would want him to know them and be fond of them and be fond of their kids. They could just basically do no wrong. And people had labeled this identity of priesthood in virtue. And they had basically said, well, are males more likely to commit violence? Yes. But if you're a priest and you're male, does that mean does that mean, and they would think, like, no one would ever ask them a question like that, but they would think, oh gosh, no, if you're a priest, there's no way. But the thing is, it's males, so trans women are male, and of course the vast majority would not harm someone, but you don't remove the risk on average of males causing harm by transitioning, like by some of them saying they're women, you know?
Exactly. I think it's kind of like if you look at like the beauty pageants in the US for little girls, if you hold one of those, you are gonna have some weirdos turn up. It's just a percentage game. Like, so it's the same thing. It's like, if something exists where people are gonna get access to kids in a way that's, you know, society deems fine, you are going to get some weirdos use that incentive. Like, most people probably have the most honest intentions, but you cannot possibly say that that some people will not use it, because they will. You've provided an incentive. You've provided a way to have access to that. It's going to happen. Like, it's just a reality that you are going to attract some weird people, and anyone who says otherwise is just not being honest with themselves.
Yeah. Well, I've heard people say, if you look at, you know, parents have these social TikToks of their kids and then it blows up and they just keep going. And so much of their following will be older men. This is just a completely random tangent, but do you have any thoughts on, you know, kids on social media? And because now we're getting a lot of trans kids being profiled by their parents as well.
I honestly think that there should be an age check for the internet at this point. I genuinely, you know, I am very much into decentralization. I'm very much into freedom of the internet, but I think we've got to the point, especially in the West, where to log on, you should have to have an ID, or there should be something. Your parents should have to let you on. I don't think it's right for them to be on it. And also, I think that it's nicer because there's an innocence to being in a vacuum, to not being attached to all this stuff. I don't know how you would implement that, obviously, and I don't necessarily think it should be a government thing, but I do think there should be some response. Like, I definitely don't think it should be a government thing, but I do definitely think that there should be some response from parents, and I don't think it should be on the internet, like, period.
Yeah.
Maybe 16, 18. It's just, it's not a good place. You have to have your wits about you. You have to know what you're doing. You have to know what you're walking into, because you just never know if that person talking to you, that person giving you the time, that person who's supposedly your friend, is actually someone with the worst intentions ever. And you wouldn't know because you're naive and you're young. And then suddenly that comes down on you. I mean, have you heard about the capping community?
No,
So this
tell me.
is again, I'll put a link in for this to a video if you. I'll send you the link. But so basically, it's a community in the early internet. I don't want to say exactly what year, but it's early YouTube, and their whole thing was finding teenage girls, making them fall in love with them, convincing, or in some way like convincing them, getting them to expose themselves somewhere on camera, taking a picture of that, and then threatening all of them that they were going to show it to all of their family, their friends. One girl actually, exit gamed herself because of this, and other people felt like years and years of harassment. And this is just someone these people had just met online, and these people had no motivation other than the fact that they obviously got some kick out of it, but that was all it was for. So when you go online, you have no idea. And that's again, that's the capping community is what it is. If you look up cappers, you'll find exactly what I'm talking about. But it's
I'm making a list of homework. I have the smoking fetish capping community.
Yeah, oh god, yeah, I've got a few. It's actually, I think it's all from the same YouTube channel, Nick Crowley. But
oh my god,
it's like, but it's like there are these people who exist online. I mean, who just want the weirdest things, and they're getting a kick out of it. Maybe, I mean, I wouldn't want to go into it. It's probably because they're some sort of psychopathy with someone who's hurt them before, and they want to hurt other people. But again, I don't think it actually matters. I think the important thing is kids stay away from those people, and they're kept away from other people. I don't think it matters necessarily why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's just they're dangerous and they need to be kept away. And all of these things, once you look online, maybe for a bit too long, because 3 years in Japan with barely anyone to talk to, I spent a lot of time on the internet. When you look online, you see a lot of these communities. You realize how dark even the most innocent thing can be once you start going further and further into it. Like the people at the top, or the people who are kind of in the depths of a lot of these communities, are people who have, again, like you said, if you don't understand it, it's probably a fetish, because there is literally no way of understanding what these people are doing this for. They're just it's weird. The list goes on. The cappers and the smoking thing are probably like the most extreme ones, but there are other ones. I mean, like in the VTube community, it's there. In the VTuber community, it's definitely there. In the kind of the VR community, it's there. So VTube, you don't know what VTubing is? Oh,
I apparently am
rabbit hole.
very, very uneducated in all these bizarre coercive online communities.
I lived in Japan, so VTubing there is like an industry. It's actually not weird. It's in Japan, it's just a way of advertising products. There are VTubers who advertise anything. They're basically fully rigged anime girls, generally controlled by a man. And in Japan, they're literally used to sell everything from tires to a bar. Like they're just not a big deal. They're on the tube every day. But the community around that as well is again, it's a lot of younger people doing it, but then older people who, some of them are probably just there to make money because there is a lot of money in it. But there's definitely some of them who are there to do stuff that's, to get access to younger people. So there's that. There's also another one that's, again, not necessarily anywhere near the same level of harm as, the Transmaxxers, the smoking fetish or the cappers. But another one would be the VR community, where they go into VR chat, and there is a lot of weirdos in there as well. And that one's, there's deep dives on all of these things, and there's these. This is where kids are going. We don't necessarily put on an Oculus, but there are a lot of 16-year-olds who do.
I actually have one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you? Have you tried it? Yeah.
I did. I used to have one, but I haven't brought it back with me. But there is a lot of. There's all of this. All of these budding online communities that attract kids because they're interesting and they're new. And some of them genuinely are. There's money to be made in them. Some of the biggest VTubers literally make hundreds of grand a month. I think at one point the top 6 on Twitch were all VTubers. So it is undeniably an industry. But at the lower levels, there are a lot of people who are pulled into it that are then exposed to kind of grooming. And I think that's something that goes on throughout the whole space.
Yeah. When you were considering transitioning, were you on any forums or, researching? Like, can you speak a bit on that and sort of the kind of things that you saw being said?
Yeah, so I was on F2M and also r/egg. Less so r/egg. I was always a bit weirded out by it. I also saw there's a lot of stuff.
Can you explain what egg is? I'm aware, but for anyone listening, that's like, what?
So the concept of an egg, and it makes kind of sense. The concept of the egg is that as a trans person, you're born twice. So you're born once as an egg, and then once you emerge from the egg as the bird you are going to be, you bust out of it, and that's when your egg breaks. And some people like to talk about painting over their egg or closing it up again, and I'm not really being myself. And it's as a concept, it makes some sense within the framework. So that's what egg means. But the r/egg is not just that. It's a bit fetishistic, the whole thing. It's there's a lot of posts like, do you want to be like dommy mummy or submissive girl? And just like, it's like, it's very over sexualized. The whole
You really don't have to look far. Like I've just kind of, had a little glance a couple of times. I really want to do a deep dive on Reddit, do like a video on it or something. But, just a post that says like, oh, I took a paracetamol and imagined it was an estrogen pill and I got the biggest euphoria boner. And it's like, then you have all these people saying, oh my God, that's just the true, like, that means that you're a woman. Like, that's the true woman inside of you trying to come out. And Jesus,
or my favorite one is like the list of, you like strategy games, trans. It's just like anything. You ate an orange today, trans. It's just whatever it is to get you to. Yeah, it's way too. There is, if you go on those forums, you would believe that there is literally no reason that anyone would ever not be trans, because everything you do is apparently that's the result of you being trans. But it's not. The funny thing, I guess, about all of this is it's not really. It's much more common amongst men, this whole way of looking at it. I don't see the same thing from women transitioning to be men, to be completely honest. Like, I just don't see. There's probably a bit of it. There's definitely a bit of it. Say it's blankly none, but it doesn't seem as sexualized.
Mm-hmm. I mean, well, there's still a whole online aspect hugely with those teenage girls. I have seen a certain proportion of, they call it it's sort of the female AGP version. It's auto homoerotic sexuality or auto androphilia. And there's definitely a portion, because you see them they fantasize about having, a dick, or a lot of it is they really want to be a gay man. Like some women are really into gay men. So, but I think it's probably a smaller proportion. And also just the online community is kind of unlocking this in some women, of which it may kind of have laid dormant, With Transmaxxers kind of, we did a whole little tour around.
Yeah, we went off into all of the other bits all around the online one. And there is, by the way, those are just I wish that was just the tip of the iceberg.
With Transmaxxers, do they have a stance on female spaces? Do you know?
I don't actually, and that was something I was thinking about. But I don't know if they do or not in their manifesto. Actually, no, I do. In their manifesto, they say, if essentially along the lines of, if you pass well enough, it's not an issue. So that's the way the manifesto looks at it. Although I think the people I spoke to in the group had kind of we'll use the third toilet sort of option, or we would use the men's if it was the men's. So they actually, again, in other than using it to get into like female only initiatives, so like educational stuff, a lot of them actually didn't have the viewpoint that it was right for them to go into sports. It was right for them to do any of that. They did see that was wrong. They weren't, for benefits, but not. Again, they do seem to be aware that their benefits might affect other people. So they just wanted the good benefits. They didn't want the benefits like, as far as I know, there's no transmaxer who like openly said, I'm going to go into female sports and beat up all the women. Like that's not something they're thinking about. They want to be women to be women because they want to be looked after by a man and have it easy. Basically, it's the incel fantasy of what a woman is, because it's like, oh, I want to be a woman, so I'll have a man look after me and pay for everything, and I can just kind of potter around the house and do stuff for him. The weird type of girl that they're after, they're like turning themselves into that. Yeah.
This concept of female privilege or male privilege, I'm really curious what your thoughts are on it, because with all things, I feel like this is oversimplified. I think female privilege is probably a bit of a taboo term in itself, because the narrative is that straight white men are the rulers and they have such easy lives, which is totally is not true. It is maybe for some. I think female privilege, my stance would be both exist, but it really depends what kind of woman or what kind of man you are. Like if you're a certain type of man, you can have great male privilege. But for those incels, that male privilege is out of reach, you know? So what are your kind of thoughts on those two things?
Yeah, no, I think that's 100% true. I think, you know, I'm quite lucky that I'm relatively good looking. So I do think it goes back to that thing that they bring up a lot, where, and this is how they kind of see themselves, like women have this inherent value that they don't have. And so they get all of the negatives of being a man with. It's very hard to say that men who are born in that position, who are unlucky, who, you know, aren't great looking, who are shorter, all of the things that the incels talk about, I don't think they do get any benefits in society. I don't think that the male thing, other than feeling maybe a bit safer, but then if you're short and you're meek, you're not getting that either. Like, you're getting literally none of the male benefits that people talk about, like being able to walk safe home at night or anything like that. You're in the exact same position as a woman would be. A rugby girl might actually be in a better position from you on the physical level. So you're not getting any of the benefits that so-called, you know, that men so-called get.
Yeah. If you have a girl who's on par with them from a meekness perspective, people would be far quicker to jump in and try and protect them or see if they're okay. But I don't feel like it would be the same thing for one of those men.
No, I completely agree. And I think as well, the day-to-day and general interactions, it's probably easier to be a girl. But overall, in long-term things, and if you're trying to achieve things and all of that, it is harder in the sense it's harder to work with people. It's harder not to be sexualized. It's harder to work in offices and all of this sort of stuff and form relationships and properly move forward in the working sector in a real way without having creeps on you. And that's definitely something that, you know, women there's a massive problem with. But I think day-to-day and basic interactions, which is what a lot of, you know, the transmaxers would see, like, you know, simple things like having the door held open for you, talking to people in a nice way, those sort of mini things, women definitely do have more of those nice than men do.
And it probably proves the fallacy for them, because even if I think a lot of people would know they're not women, but it doesn't matter because they're trans women, and lots of people would treat them, you know, maybe even more sensitively. So that may then be telling them, oh my gosh, it's working. Like I'm a female. I'm walking through the world as female now. But it's sort of like, well, no, but you are walking through the world as something else, and that is having this sort of political sensitivity.
Again, it's like they don't realize that maybe it's not necessarily all care. It's people looking at them and being a bit scared as well, because there's the underlying threat that comes with being a trans woman these days, which is the threat of, if you say anything about this, I can blow this up and ruin your life. Like, there is this underlying thing. So a lot of these people, I guess they wouldn't be, they might not know it. And I'm sure this happens with, you know, people who transition all the time, is a lot of them probably think people are looking at them and being kind to them and being really nice, when in reality they're kind of terrified of them because they don't know what to do. Like, and that's and it's not saying in a transphobic way, more in a way of, if I say the wrong thing, I'm going to be fired. Like, I'm now this person who's in my office or in my space. I have to be careful with everything I'm saying. And that is probably, again, because of the discourse and people who are not doing favors for the trans community by speaking online, that make people scared. And then, you know, these people act in a scared way. And then on top of that, they start to freak out, and it kind of spirals. I think a lot of these transmaxers wouldn't realize that that's actually the case, that people are looking at them in a way, oh, we have to be careful of this person, rather than I care for this person.
Yeah. How ubiquitous do you think this is? You know, how many of these maxers are out there?
I think that, like I said, I don't necessarily think the important thing about the transmaxers is that they have a manifesto Discord group or anything. I think the important thing is that they're being honest, and like I said, a lot of people in the group don't identify as transmaxers but share a lot of the ideas. So I think if everyone's being honest with themselves, every trans person wants to look the best that they possibly can. every trans person is definitely aware of the benefits or drawbacks that they'll get. And if they're not, then they're either just not very empathetic of others, or they're just, not thinking. Then I think it's difficult to say that there's a large proportion of them that wouldn't be transmaxers but would think about these things. Because like I said about even me, like when I was thinking about doing it, I wanted to do it because I was dysphoric and all of that, but I also was, I was aware of the benefits I would get. And I was aware that it would have been good for my career or what I was doing. I was aware that it would have helped me in the arguments or the abuse I was having. I was aware of all of these kind of things that would be better. And I think that all trans people should or are aware of those things. And like I said, if you're not, then maybe you're not really thinking about other people enough, or you're not thinking about the consequences of what's going on and what you're doing, because it does have an impact on other people, and it has an impact on the way people look at you. So there are drawbacks and there are benefits, and that's just like anything. Yeah. So I think, no, not to say all people transitioning are transmaxers, but I do think some of the ideas are probably shared by a much wider cross-section of trans people than they would like to admit.
Yeah, that makes sense. I would assume actually that there are many trans people out there who don't understand the drawbacks. There's two things I see floating around these days from the gender critical space. Some of it's starting to kind of concern me because some of them are very hardline, and they become more and more hardline. So sort of they start at a stance of, well, leave the kids alone, but adults can do what they want if they don't invade spaces. But now you have a portion of saying, after the WPATH files and the CAS report, saying, well, actually, there's no evidence this benefits anyone, so no one should be doing this. And they say, for the people who are publicly saying, actually, no, I'm really happy, and we can see these people, and some of them have thriving careers, and they clearly are not a mess, and they say how much better their life got. But then they say, oh, well, for every medical scandal we've had, there's been a portion of people who've just said, yeah, that works for me, and it's like a placebo thing. So do you have any thoughts on, I don't know if you've kind of heard those arguments being sprinkled around these days?
I have. I don't like the fact that whenever in society in general, the pendulum swings too far one way, we never seem to be able to make it go even. We always, or a train getting to the station, we always just blast straight past the station and go all the way to the other side. And I don't think that's helpful. I think that, yes, kids definitely shouldn't have anything to do with this, obviously. I think most people are on that train now. And then but I think adults, if they want to transition, they should. I do think that the care should be more honest. I think that the doctors should talk more about the drawbacks and the benefits. They should talk more about the surgical stuff, because clearly lots of people haven't been informed. All of those things. But if an adult wants to do this and they're happy, that's great. Like, I just really don't see a problem. I really don't. As long as they're not pushing it on, as long as they're not hurting others with what they're doing, I just think that people should be entitled to do whatever they want with their body, and they should also be respected in society for doing so. But it shouldn't infringe on other people's ability to go about their day. That's kind of
Yeah, that's why I feel if we're going to create this ability in society for a lot of people to kind of pass, then there needs to be provisions in place for these spaces, having third gender neutral spaces. And, I think it would be great if when people transitioned, that was an honest conversation with therapists, with doctors saying, you can do this. It does not mean that everyone is going to accept you for that. And it does not mean that you are entitled to then take privileges away from the group that you want to emulate. And just more frank discussions. I also feel like if there was a lot more gatekeeping, therapy for minimum 2 years. If someone wants to transition at 18, kind of therapeutic interventions till they're 21, like that kind of stuff, I think you get a lot more people transitioning that maybe it would become efficacious. Because I think the argument is that, well, some people will say they don't regret their transition, but they still have the same level of poor mental health, the same level of suicidality. So it's difficult then to prove if it's worked or not, which I understand. But I agree. I think as long as they understand the risks, it's fully informed consent.
If you're going to introduce a new group of people to a safe space that's for the most vulnerable people in society, you know, on like the hierarchy of care thing, if you have men, women, children, who leaves the Titanic first, whatever. So if we're going to introduce a new group of people to the people who are the most vulnerable or lower on the scale, they need to be asked. They need to have it needs to be, you can't just say, hey, now we're inserting people into your safe space. You might have PTSD, you might have sexual assault, you might have all these things, but we don't care. We're just inserting them. It also needs to be addressed the fact that, most times a trans person goes to the female toilet, they go to the toilet. But the problem is people using this as a way of getting in who have the worst intentions and are doing it for the worst intentions. And it's also completely situational. I mean, the toilet at a gay club is going to have mixed genders, but the toilet at a school or at a, like a gym or a public swimming pool, that's a completely different setting. Like, all of these things matter. That's why it can't really be a law, and it can't, because it really is situational.
Yeah, I've seen that firsthand. All the queer clubs I go to, it was quite small. There was literally a wall of like urinal, loads of guys peeing, and then all these girls queuing for the cubicles. And because this is always on my mind, I turned to girls and I was like, so what's your opinion on this? These men just peeing right behind you. But all of these people are so progressive, if that's what you want to call that. I think partly it's normalized and they are more comfortable with, even being like naked around a man or whatever. But then I think a part of it is there's a pressure socially to, well, it's like these things are progressive, so you shouldn't feel uncomfortable. And I think people sort of get drawn into that,
Yeah. It's just like, we should be open-minded, but not so open-minded our brains fall out. We've given men a way to get into women's toilets. That's what we've done. It doesn't matter whether there are people who are trans who are doing whatever, but we have given an avenue, and that means weirdos will use that avenue. That's just guaranteed. I mean, even like the kids' cartoons growing up, there's always an episode where someone gets like an invisibility cloak and goes into the women's bathrooms. It's just something that like men have been kind of indoctrinated with since forever.
Yeah. I saw a quote from someone posted from Harry Potter that I completely forgot. I don't know if you've seen it too, but if one of the boys in the Gryffindor common room, I'm assuming you know Harry Potter, but if they tried to go into the female dormitory, it would turn into a slide. So people are kind of nodding to that and saying this has always been important to J.K. Rowling, and it's not now betraying her progressiveness. Has your stance on all of that changed over time?
No, honestly, with J.K. Rowling, I see someone who is got nothing to gain from this, so is probably being completely honest. I think sometimes she probably gets caught up in Twitter a bit too much, but in general, I don't think she's someone who's hateful or nasty. I think she's coming at this from a perspective of caring about people and worrying about people, and it might come across in the wrong way sometimes because people get Twitter brain. I can't look at that person and be like, oh, well, she's doing it for the money. Like, that's just ridiculous. Or she's doing it for the attention. Like, it doesn't, she already has all of that. The only reason she could possibly be wanting to do this is to help people. And I do think that that's something that people need to kind of come to terms with, is that, she obviously has the best intentions in every way.
When you were thinking of transitioning, though, what were your thoughts around, the whole transphobia? And because I didn't understand the validity of some of these arguments when I had not researched it enough. I was like, why are people being so horrible? Trans people aren't automatically predators, all of that kind of stuff. So was that on your mind at all?
I would have been more towards the Blair White side of things. But I already had those ideas. Just because I wanted to do something doesn't mean that I for all of the ideas and the ideologue ideas, even at the time, I don't think I did. I was much more leaning towards the conservative side, which is again why I think it's so important we should be accepting of this in all parts of society.
Would you say there's such a thing as true trans?
No. I don't. I think there's just people who want to transition. I think, again, the Transmaxxers, going back to that, you would worry about, they say if you transition, you're trans. And I think that's kind of, in a weird sort of way, that's the way the mainstream thinks a bit, because I've had so many comments on mine saying that I'm not trans because I didn't transition, so I didn't go all the way down the path, so therefore I'm not trans. But it doesn't really matter where you leave it at. It feels like one of those kind of oxymorons where if you are trans, you've gone through and you've been trans.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's all sorts of different motives that lead someone to transition. People have been through all sorts of different things, like the neurodiversity, trauma, autism, homosexuality, like the list goes on. And I think I'm not here to say one is more valid than the other, but I do believe that some people's transitions are more successful because they're coming from a place of being quite grounded in biology and like reality. And their reasons for doing it are more authentic in a way, in that it sort of is going to benefit them. I think some other people's reasons are more frivolous. They're not well thought out. So I think Blair is an example of someone, and I love her. She's such a badass, but someone that it really worked for. But I do kind of feel like it probably only works well for a very small percentage of people. And that's why I feel like with the medical care being offered, they should be trying to identify those people,
Yeah.
Unless it just becomes a cosmetic thing that people,
I don't know how. I do think as time goes on, it does lean towards more the cosmetic side. But I don't actually think that's a bad thing. Like you can feel these things, but if it was kind of a cosmetic decision and people were still accepted and everyone was still lovely about it, as they should be, it wouldn't make a difference to me if it was all put into the cosmetic category, and it probably wouldn't make a difference to most trans people, because it's like, well, I still want to do this and people will still refer to me as I want to be referred to, but I will go through the process, and it is a cosmetic thing.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned before our call that there's a lot of girls who've reached out to you, that they said your story has helped them. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, no, quite a few in my personal life and then online as well. Female to male have reached out to me and just kind of I've sat down and had long conversations with them. And again, I think the interesting thing about them is they do seem a lot more motivated by the societal things. So a lot of them seem to want to remove their sexuality, remove their kind of the thing that gives them the male gaze. They want to get rid of that. They want to, or they want to identify as a man because they feel like the women that they want to date would like them more, or something like that. It's a lot of the as self-identifying kind of butch lesbians who think like this, and it does almost always seem to be kind of linked back to this want to kind of fit in society as the thing that they feel like they are, because they're being pushed away from being just themselves. And a lot of them go towards top surgery first, and I think we're going to have an influx of people who regret that deeply. A lot of non-binary girls as well who are identifying as non-binary but will still cut.
I see a lot of that
as well.
You see them in clubs here. Especially that the trend is to get them with no nipples. Like that is a pure trend. Do you know what I mean?
I think they'll regret it. I really do. Especially if they're doing it and then, if they're transitioning all the way, there's probably less of a case of them regretting it. But if they're going to the non-binary phrase and doing it, it is, like you said, it feels like a fashion statement. It's a bit, yeah.
And I truly do believe that identity in 15, 20 years won't, will have something new,
Yeah.
And it may not have anything to do with gender. So obviously you've come so far, Sascha. Would you say you're sort of out at the other end? How do you feel looking forward in terms of gender dysphoria, or are you in a new space mentally now where you feel stronger?
I am. I feel much happier with who I am day to day. I feel much more comfortable. But I'd be lying if I said I don't have bouts of dysphoria. I do when I'm sad and I'm depressed, and sometimes, but I can understand it now and rationalize it like I couldn't before. Before it was kind of this yearning, this feeling. Now it's the same thing, but I can kind of think what I think and look at my mind and be like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. It's like you can't be that person, or you can't be a different person. It's just wait for it to pass. Come to terms with it a lot more than I did before.
Do you feel more protected towards not going down that road one day?
Yes, I don't think I ever would. No, I have no interest. I think that it's unrealistic. I mean, if you look at the button test, and if I could press a magic button and be a girl, I still would. But that's not reality. And also, that's not what transitioning actually is. That's the thing. It's not actually becoming a woman. It's a completely different thing. That is the honest truth. If I could, and it was magic, I would. Or if I could restart my life as one, I would. Right. But I don't have that option, and that's not reality. So one has to work with the framework of reality.
Sounds good to me. What's next for you professionally?
I'm mostly at the moment, I work in Web3. I don't really like to talk about it in too much in relation to this because I don't want people to get the wrong idea that I'm trying to sell it or anything. But it's what I do professionally. I like designing websites. I work in kind of that space. So that's what I'm moving towards. I run obviously FOMA Mag, and we're moving more into a kind of internet subculture magazine. So that will still be going. But a lot of the stuff now, for the last couple of years, since my whole kind of life fell apart, and I had everything taken from me, I've kind of been starting from zero. So it's been quite refreshing in a way because I'm able to really explore what interests me. And find kind of a new avenue over time, as well as I've slowly kind of come back and developed motivation again, because for a very long time it was very hard to get motivated about anything. I'm starting to see kind of problems in the world that I want to help fix. And, just talking about this since January or whatever, when it was the Mail article came out, the amount of people who have contacted me and said that it's helping them, I think it's worth talking about, continuing to talk about. Once it stops helping people, then I'll stop. But until then, I'll keep going. And in the meantime, I'm still building stuff in the Web3 space. I'm still doing stuff like that. So I'm quite active. This genuinely is something that just matters deeply to me. And I don't want two things in the world. Two things that really bother me a lot is people who are powerless like me and who are in a position where they had their power taken away from them being abused. I don't like that. That makes me very unhappy and kind of viscerally angry. And then also people being as sad as I was. I don't want people to be sad. I don't want people to feel like that. I don't want people to feel like the only way out is, either doing something that's, a permanent solution to temporary problems, or doing another thing that's a temporary, and doing both either way. I just don't want people to be sad like that. And if what I'm saying as someone who went through that helps people also come out of it, that's great. That's really great. But yeah, what bothers me more than anything right now is people without power being abused by people who have power, or people who have some inherent kind of power abusing other people. I don't like that. That's kind of my main focus.
Well, I'm excited to see what happens. You're incredibly intelligent with everything you say, and the insights I see from you on Twitter and the kind of things you're talking about. You obviously have this deep sense of compassion, like you just said. So I think you'll do great things, and it helps to have the model looks as well. So I think you got it all.
Thank you. No, I would be lying if I said that. Yeah, it definitely helps.
For sure. You're on Instagram, Twitter, anywhere else people could find you?
No, just Instagram and Twitter, and it's at Sascha Bailey on both. And then if you want to learn more about kind of what I do semi-professionally in kind of the digital art space, I guess, it's FOMA Mag. It's a part of the whole kind of digital art industry over the last 5 years that I think people hadn't seen. And it was something that was started as a passion project with a bunch of artists, and it was just, we wanted a space to promote what we were doing. So that's what it is. It's not really something that's trying to sell you anything. It's just something that's saying, hey, look at this cool stuff.
Well, listen, thank you so much. This has been awesome. I'm glad that we've got to know each other, and we'll keep in touch. We can probably link up again once I've explored these other subcultures. So thank you, Sascha. I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Jack.